Hey guys, welcome back to Unit 5, which again is on agriculture. So we already covered Chapter 12, which was mainly about the three different agricultural revolutions. Today we are going to cover Chapter 13, which is on the different agricultural regions. And basically there are 11 different agricultural regions that you are going to need to know. And what you're going to need to know is where they are located and what type of climate is located there and the basic process of the type of agriculture. So all of these are also vocab terms, so make sure we know the ins and outs of them. So this chapter's essential question is, why does agriculture vary so greatly around the world? And really kind of the biggest answer to that is because climate varies so differently around the world. So you're not going to be able to grow the same types of crops or have the same types of animals in all these different types of climate. So by the end of this unit, you will understand that the development of agriculture led to widespread alteration of the natural environment. Major agricultural regions reflect physical geography and economic forces. Settlement patterns and rural land use are reflected in the cultural landscape, and changes in food production and consumption present challenges and opportunities. So by the end of this section, you'll be able to identify agricultural production regions associated with major bioclimatic zones. So again, what is going to determine what type of agriculture you do is primarily based on what type of climate you have. So plant and animal production is dependent on climatic conditions, including spatial variation in temperature and rainfall. Some agricultural regions are associated with particular bioclimatic zones. So Mediterranean agriculture only happens where you have Mediterranean climates. Shifting agriculture only usually happens in places that have tropical climates. Pastoral nomadism only happens in arid or semi-arid climates. So you do need to know those types of things by the end of this chapter. So the different types of agriculture that you need to know, and again, you need to know where they happen and what the basic process is pastoral nomadism, shifting cultivation, plantation, mixed crop and livestock, grain, commercial gardening, dairy, Mediterranean, and livestock ranching. So before we start talking about the actual types of agriculture, we need to understand that all agriculture is going to fit into one of two categories. The first category is called subsistence agriculture. Subsistence agriculture is when you are growing plants and animals for your own consumption. So you are literally just trying to survive. That's your purpose for farming. The other category is known as commercial agriculture. And commercial agriculture is when you're growing plants and animals for sale. So you're doing it to make money. So let's start with the first type here we see, which is pastoral nomadism. Pastoral nomadism is going to be found in arid or semi-arid climate, which are dry lands. So those locations are going to be in Southwest, Central, and East Asia, and also North Africa. So basically areas around deserts. So again, we're going to see that around the Sahara Desert in North Africa. We're going to see it around the Arabian Desert in Southwest Asia. We're going to see it around the Gobi Desert in East Asia. So that's where we find pastoral nomadism. And what pastoral nomadism is a type of subsistence agriculture. So they're doing this to consume themselves, where they herd animals. So animal products is mainly what these people are going to consume, but not meat. In fact, the majority of the diet for pastoral nomads is going to be milk and dairy products. So that is what they are raising these animals for. And you guys are going to watch a little video from Vox Borders this week, and you're going to see some actual pastoral nomads around the Gobi Desert. The second type of agriculture that you need to know is also a type of subsistence agriculture. So again, this is people growing food to consume themselves. This is called shifting cultivation, and it's mainly found in tropical climates, which means near the equator. So that's in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, right along the equator. And what shifting cultivation entails is cutting down the rainforest, which is known as slash and burn. So you cut down all the trees, you burn all of the debris, and then you plant your crops there. But unfortunately, the actual soil in the rainforest is not very good. So you can't use the actual plots of land for very long, which is why it's called shifting cultivation. So you only use the plot for a few years and then you have to shift and do it all over again in a new area. So that's what shifting cultivation is. The third one here we see is plantation, and plantation is a type of commercial agriculture. So that means you're growing these crops for sale. Plantation is going to be found in tropical climates as well. So the same place that you would find shifting cultivation near the equator. And plantation agriculture is mainly going to be monocropping, which means you're just going to grow one specific thing because, again, you're growing it for sale. So this could be any type of tropical fruits, so bananas, pineapples, those types of things are grown on plantations, as well as rubber and things like that. And also, drug crops are a big one in many of these places as well. All right, so make sure we understand. A lot of students get confused with plantations because you know the history here in the South. We don't have plantation agriculture here in the South anymore. All right, plantations today are found in tropical climates in less developed countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. All right, the next type is actually the most common type that is found here in the United States, and it's known as mixed crop and livestock. So this is found in cold and warm mid-latitude climates. This is the most common type of agriculture here in the US in the Midwest. Remember, the Midwest is those areas near the Great Lakes. So that's states like Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. And this is going to entail growing both crops and animals. The purpose of the crops is mainly to feed the animals. So you grow a bunch of corn, that corn then feeds the cows, you sell the cows for money. That's basically what mixed crop and livestock agriculture is. The next one here is grain agriculture. So grain agriculture is going to be found in cold mid-latitude climate. That here in the US is mainly in the area known as the Great Plains, which is basically from Montana to Texas. It's also found in parts of Canada and also in Europe. So grain agriculture is when you are specifically growing grains for human consumption. So here in the Great Plains, it's mainly wheat, some corn as well, but mainly wheat is going to be the biggest one for that type of agriculture. The next type of agriculture you need to know is known as commercial gardening and fruit farming. Commercial gardening is obviously a type of commercial agriculture, meaning you're growing these fruits and vegetables for sale. This is typically going to be found in more warm mid-latitude climates. Here in the US, that's here in the South. When you guys think of the nickname of Georgia, we're known as the peach state. Florida is known for their oranges. That's because the main type of agriculture we do here in the South is commercial gardening and fruit farming. Though, interesting enough, actually South Carolina grows more peaches than we do. Georgia is actually number one in watermelons and peanuts. So just a little fun fact for you there. All right, next type of agriculture you need to know is known as dairying. Dairying is exactly what it sounds like. It is growing animals for their dairy products. This is typically found in cold and warm mid-latitudes. Here in the US, that's mainly in the Northeast, also in southeastern Canada and northwestern Europe. Now, this is one type of agriculture that's not done necessarily because of climate. Dairy is going to be produced near population. So the reason why it's mainly found in the northeastern United States is because that's our biggest population concentration. And then the second largest dairying is going to be happening in California because that's where the second biggest population is. So dairying takes place near population because of the fact that milk products perish very quickly. You don't want to produce your milk in Kansas if it's going to be sold in New York City because it's going to go bad before you can get it to New York City. You want it to be produced right outside of New York City so you can get it to that population very quickly. All right, the next type of agriculture is Mediterranean agriculture. This is only going to be found in Mediterranean climate, which is going to be found obviously around the Mediterranean Sea. So that's going to be in Europe and North Africa, and also in specific other places. The very, very southern tip of South Africa, so along the Cape of South Africa, the central coast of Chile, the coast of central California, and also the southern Cape of Australia. These are the only places in the world that have Mediterranean climate. And it is going to be mainly commercial. It's famous crops like olives and grapes. The most important commercial product that comes out of Mediterranean climate is wine. Wine is the big moneymaker for Mediterranean agriculture, which wine is produced from grapes. All right, the next type of agriculture is livestock ranching. Now, students always get livestock ranching and pastoral nomadism confused because they are very similar, meaning that they're found in the same type of climate, so arid or semi-arid dry lands, and it also involves raising animals. Big difference here is that livestock ranching is commercial, whereas we said pastoral nomadism is subsistence. So pastoral nomads grow animals mainly for their dairy to keep themselves alive. Livestock ranching, you grow animals mainly for sale, and it's mainly for meat products. So that's the big difference between those two. And then finally, the last and actually the most common in terms of number of people who are in this type of agriculture is known as intensive subsistence. And this is going to be found in our largest population concentrations in the world. So South Asia and East Asia is the primary areas for intensive subsistence agriculture, which means that it's a person has just a small plot of land and they have to grow a lot of food in order to support themselves on it. So mainly going to be crops like rice and wheat that are done in intensive subsistence agriculture. But it's subsistence meaning they're growing it for themselves. By the end of this next section, you'll be able to analyze the economic forces that influence agricultural practices. So agricultural production regions are defined by the extent to which they reflect subsistence or commercial practices, or intensive or extensive use of land. Intensive farming practices include market gardening, plantation agriculture, mixed crop, and livestock. Intensive means that you are heavily working a smaller plot of land. So you have a small plot of land and you're trying to get a lot out of that. Extensive farming includes shifting cultivation, nomadic herding, ranching. This means you have a lot of land and you're not getting very much output per area of land. So we just said that extensive land use means that you're not getting very much output per area of land, which means that you're going to want, if you're doing extensive types of agriculture, you're going to want that land to be super cheap, meaning it's going to be in areas not close to cities and not very valuable for other types of land. Intensive land use means you are going to work the land very, very harder. So you are going to get a lot out of a smaller plot of land. So this might be closer to a city because the land costs are going to be more expensive. Intensive also many times includes what is called double cropping, where you are trying to get two crops on the same land in 1 year. This is very important in places that do intensive subsistence agriculture, like South and East Asia. So what happens in many parts of South and Southeast Asia is in the rainy season, because of the monsoons that happen in the Indian Ocean, during the rainy season, they're able to grow rice because rice is a grain that grows in water. During the dry monsoon season, they're able to grow wheat because wheat is a grain that doesn't take very much water. And so they're able to get two crops on the same field in 1 year, and that's what double cropping is. What we see because of population growth is increasing intensity, meaning people are having to work the same plots of land even harder. Now, this can lead to big problems like soil degradation, meaning that if you keep planting the same thing on the same field, eventually the nutrients are going to run out of the soil and things are not going to grow there anymore. So that's a really big problem with this. So we said that ranching, livestock ranching, growing animals commercially is extensive, but in the developed countries like the US, because they're trying to cut down on the cost of land, what we have seen is livestock ranching really being replaced by what are known as feedlots or CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. So we've taken an industry that used to be extensive and we're turning it intensive, meaning that instead of letting these cows graze over lots and lots of acres, now we put them in little pens and just feed them lots of corn. And so it's a lot less land to be able to grow even more cows. And so that is an issue that you're going to see in this week's film that you're going to watch called Food. So this chart right here does a great job of explaining the differences between commercial and subsistence, as well as intensive versus extensive. So make sure that you read all of this and understand this. This is all things that we just talked about. By the end of this next section in chapter 13, you'll be able to explain the spatial organization of large-scale commercial agriculture and agribusiness. Large-scale commercial agriculture operations are replacing small family farms. The transformation of agriculture into large-scale agribusiness has resulted in a complex commodity chains which link production and consumption of agricultural products. Meaning a commodity chain would be, how does that potato get from that field in Idaho to, your consumption of it via French fries from your local McDonald's? That whole process is part of that commodity chain. Technological improvements have changed the economies of scale in the agricultural sector. Everything is now much, much bigger, and there's actually a whole lot less farmers involved. So make sure you understand all of these important vocabulary words for chapter 13, including agribusiness, supply chain, monoculture, suitcase farm, commodity chain, and cool chains. So this chart really gives a good example of kind of how things used to be done on a much smaller scale, and in some cases is still done in certain places, and then versus how most of our food is grown today, which is really the agribusiness scale. So on kind of the homeowner scale, growing food, raising vegetables in your backyard garden, whereas the agribusiness scale would be owning farms of thousands of acres that are worked by a large staff of employees. Processing food would be eating fresh, homegrown vegetables for dinner, preserving vegetables for future personal use. That would be that homeowner scale. Whereas the agribusiness scale, canning and freezing products in factories that are often located near fields. Now, again, make sure you look at all of this, but this has been a pretty rapid transformation that really started with the second agricultural revolution. Used to, most people were involved in agriculture. They were farmers. Today, most of you probably don't even know a farmer. And that's because our small number of farmers are able to grow a huge number of products today. This last section of chapter 13 is all about the interdependence among regions of food production and consumption. So food is part of a global supply chain. Products from less developed, low latitude countries, meaning countries that are near the equator, provide the developed countries with luxury products that we can't grow in our own climates. Things like coffee and bananas are often consumed globally, but mainly in our developed countries. So patterns of global food distribution are affected by political systems, infrastructure, and patterns of world trade. So make sure you understand all of these vocab terms for this portion. Luxury crops are things that we don't necessarily really need to survive. Coffee, it really doesn't provide anything for us in terms of needing to survive, but we like it. And so a lot of less developed countries near the equator in Africa and South America grow a lot of coffee on coffee plantations to sell to developed countries. So this causes problems in developing countries because it means that they're growing these products for us instead of food for their own local consumption. And remember, population is growing rapidly in many of those countries. So they need more food, and yet they're actually growing less because they are devoting their land to growing these luxury crops for us in developed countries. This is all part of the system that we today call neocolonialism. Many times it's not the people in those countries who actually even own those plantations. It is the companies that are based in countries like the US. Companies like Folgers, a big coffee company who owns a lot of land in less developed countries and grows these on plantations. So there is a movement known as the Fair Trade Movement, which strives to provide a fair living wage for these farmers in less developed countries. So now fair trade products, so if you buy coffee that has the fair trade product label on it, it's going to typically be more expensive because of the fact that they've made sure in that supply chain that those farmers have been paid a living wage for that coffee. The next time you're in the grocery store, I want you to go down the coffee aisle because it's a good example of this. And I want you to compare the prices of coffee that is not fair trade, so things like Folgers, versus the more high-end coffees that you're going to see this fair trade label on. And you'll see that it is more expensive because of those facts. So you also need to understand subsidies and infrastructure. Subsidies are basically when the government pays farmers to do certain things. So here in the US, the government pays huge amounts of our subsidies to our farmers to try to control the market. So for example, if the government sees that there's going to be too much cotton grown that season, what they'll do is they'll actually go and they'll pay certain farmers for their cotton crop, and instead of allowing it to be sold that year, they may house it in a warehouse. And then next year, they'll pay those same farmers to grow something else besides cotton to try to level out the market. And so it is a type of social policy that is very common in the United States. And then infrastructure has to do with all of the various things that it takes to get things to certain places. Infrastructure is roads, it's also water systems, it's also all of those things. And for modern commercial agriculture, especially because of the Green Revolution, in order for countries to be really competitive in agriculture, they have to have a lot of infrastructure because it does take machinery, it does take irrigation, it does take all of those things to be able to grow a lot of crops. So that concludes it for chapter 13. We do have one more chapter, chapter 14, to cover for Unit 5, Agriculture.